Begin at once to live, and count each separate day as a separate life. Seneca. Welcome back, Full Metal family, to another episode of the Full Metal Cast. I want to thank you for your patience as I was unable to upload episode 5 until late Tuesday night instead of the scheduled Sunday 5 p.m. Eastern time slot. Also want to thank you all for tuning in again this week after I likely put you to sleep rambling on about mortgages, Marxism, and whatnot during the last episode. I know that was a bit more dry or educational and a bit of a departure from the usual like gun tube, freedom, anti-state sort of thing, even though we sprinkled in a little bit of that. But hopefully you learned something. Hopefully, you are proud and can now walk away with a sense of pride that you understand more about the mortgage market than the average person out there. I want to keep it shorter this week, however, as I'm about to hit the road to go out of state to complete my knee tattoo that I mentioned either in the last episode or the one before that. I'm very excited to finish it. It's going to look great. I'll post a picture on Instagram of the finished result, but I'm very much happy that I will not be doing my other knee one and that I will not have to be going back to put more ink on my right knee because, oh boy, does it hurt. But while I'm out of town, I actually am going to try to sneak in another recording session in the hopes that things sort of line up and that next episode can be a little bit different, hoping to shake things up and maybe sneak in a surprise. But I don't want to promise anything. That's just sort of what I'm tentatively planning on here. But anyways, today I'm going to be answering the question that has gone buried due to all of the drama playing out in society today. That question being, what is a man? So by now, everyone is aware of the Matt Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? It's a good film that sounds the alarm and reveals how much of our minds and minds of trusted medical professionals and intellectuals have decomposed. The latest Twitter drama even helped highlight this as Ella Irwin, Twitter's ex-head of trust and safety, what a Silicon Valley job title, by the way, resigned after she tried to kill the airing of the Matt Walsh film, on the platform, and Elon didn't back her decision and actually kind of criticized it in the public square. An incredibly relevant but slightly dated book on my reading list that partially paints the picture of how we got here by sharing accounts of similar things taking place in the 2000s and 2010s is Galileo's Middle Finger by Alice Streger. Read this book during the Wuhan flu sort of era as it just started, either during 2020 or 2021, sitting out by the pool. Loved reading, picked reading back up. I don't know if I shared that, but this is definitely in the top 5. I love this book, incredibly relevant today. It's fairly affordable too. I bought like a used hardcover on Amazon. Honestly, the cover art was just too cool to pass up. The soft cover looks a little bit differently. I think it's been updated. And fun fact, actually, you can see Galileo's actual middle finger in a museum in Florence, Italy, and the book actually explains how and why it ended up on display, so I won't spoil it. But when I read the book, not only did I find the accounts provided by the author interesting, but I really enjoyed the progression of her feelings on government and the scientific and medical communities. The book starts and her political lean is very clear. Hell, even halfway through the book, she explains how she was waiting to catch a plane when she learned that Obama was elected, and she started crying tears of joy as she believed that logic and wisdom would now finally be the standard as it relates to government regulation, oversight, and support in the scientific and medical fields, to which I almost vomited. But she ends the book with the following paragraphs, and I've dog-eared and I highlighted these portions of the book because they were just so powerful. And bear with me, they are a little bit lengthy, but they were just so badass. They just stuck out immediately, and they will be relevant to the topic at hand, I swear. What do you do when you realize the fourth estate is dying, and there are no accountants on white horses in Washington? The answer now seems obvious to me. You work harder. You find compatriots in the ivory tower, the kind of people who don't mind difficult questions that may take years to answer and that might get you in a heap of trouble, and you work together as long and as hard as you can. Not bad, but it gets a little bit. She kind of goes off in some other portions here. This one's a little bit lengthier. It takes up the whole page. So, again, bear with me. Perhaps most troubling is the tendency within some branches of the humanities to portray scholarly quests to understand reality as quaint or naive, even colonialist and dangerous. Sure, I know, objectivity is easily desired and impossible to perfectly achieve, and some forms of scholarship will feed oppression, but to treat those who seek a more objective understanding of a problem as fools or de facto criminals is to betray the very idea of an academy of learners. When I run into such academics, people who will ignore and, if necessary, outright reject any fact that might challenge their ideology, who declare scientific methodologies as just another way of knowing, I feel this crazy desire to institute a purge. It smells like fungal rot in the hoof, of a plow horse we can't afford to lose. Call me ideological for wanting us all to share a belief in the importance of seeking reliable, verifiable knowledge. But surely, that is supposed to be the common value of the learned. What privilege should people enjoy who can say there is no objective reality, no way to ascertain more accurate knowledge? I know from experience there are people who typically claim to speak on behalf of the marginalized and the oppressed, yet they have not sat and learned enough anatomy and medicine to know what a clitoroplasty actually involves. Big words coming up. I may have to put them above me instead of trying to butcher them here. In terms of loss of tissue and sensation, they have not witnessed what happens to the minds and bodies of scholars falsely accused of crimes against humanity. They have not had to watch prenatal dexamethasone being advertised as safe for mother and child, while knowing from a literature search that there is not a single decent scientific study to support such a claim. If they don't want to believe that there's an objective reality as to what this one's going above me, does to a 4-week-old embryo, then how are they to understand how much the truth matters to justice? These must be people who have never had to fear enough to desperately need truth, the longing for truth, the gift of truth. Surely the scholar who thinks truth is for children at Christmas time is the person who has never had to fear the knock of the secret police at their door. Oh, and off we go. America, 1776. The Declaration of Independence is finally signed, formally renouncing British rule and articulating a new vision of human liberty. There was no internet in 1776, of course, to spread the good news, so the news had to be spread by other means. Knowing that the people of Philadelphia needed to be informed of the monumental turn of events, John Nixon climbed up on a platform and read the Declaration aloud to an assembled crowd. Here's the thing. The platform Nixon climbed up on had been erected 7 years earlier and not for political purposes. It was put up in 1769 by the American Philosophical Society, the scientific society founded by Ben Franklin, so that one of their members, the astronomer David Rittenhouse, could make formal observations of the transit of Venus, the passage of that planet across the face of the sun. Rittenhouse was working with the support of his peers to further the post-Galilean understanding of the universe. The platform was put up to look at the sky. One scientist in 1769, following in Galileo's footsteps, wanting simply to know more about the stars, had literally set the stage for another man in 1776 speaking to the people the truth of their core freedoms. If, as the investigative press collapses and no longer can function as an effective check on excess and corruption, and people live and die forever inhabiting self-obsessed corners of the internet, and the government and the ad-selling Google industrial complex ever increased surveillance on us, and we can't trust people in the government to be our advocates or even to be sensible, if we have any hope of maintaining freedom of thought and freedom of person in the near and distant future, we have to remember that the Founding Fathers knew that freedom of thought and freedom of person must be erected together, that truth and justice cannot exist without one another, that when one is threatened, the other is harmed, that justice and thus morality require the empirical pursuit. Well, quite the 180 there, Miss Dreger. Bravo, I will say. But I mentioned this book after referencing the Matt Walsh documentary because it's not as inflammatory today, and it might be seen as like easier to approach for someone who's a bit turned off by the whole, I guess, the heat that the What Is a Woman documentary is garnering. So don't be afraid to get your feet wet with that. It is very informational. And very entertaining at the same time. So highly recommend. But bringing things back to the question at hand, society is very much caught up in the female side of the coin as it relates to the trans debate in this country. The Bud Light, Target, and athletic controversies all prove this. In all of these cases, the attire, the beer cans, and the abilities being promoted were highlighting trans females, which is intriguing at the very least. And while this topic is not about looking into why this skew exists, I do think it's important to touch on it as I continue to frame my stance on the question of what is a man. Now, all articles and studies I tried looking up don't make it super clear, as none could provide consistent data that could be corroborated with any reputable source. And perhaps there's some statistical gaslighting going on out there on this topic. But a University of California, San Francisco study states that worldwide estimates for trans women are 1 in every 30,000 people. Trans men are estimated at 1 in every 100,000 people. However, these numbers are likely an underestimate because they only account for trans people diagnosed with gender identity disorder and or people receiving services at gender clinics, which we know are not inclusive of all trans people. And again, to sort of reference a statistic from the prior episodes regarding statistical gaslighting and mental health, we know that over 50% of adults with a mental health issue do not seek treatment. So apply that to that stat as you wish. And while the scientific community has done some research into whether or not there are trends in genetics within trans people to help explain this sort of imbalance, there is nothing conclusive at the moment. And by imbalance, I mean the skew of trans women to trans men. We do, however, know that regulation and societal norms play a large factor in the statistics, though. I mean, just look at the explosive growth of the number of those who identify as a part of the LGBTQ community now. It is understandable that as more laws are passed and as large corporations and governments take part in promoting LGBT equity, using equity intentionally here because none of these groups are actually interested in actual equality, the number of individuals who identify as part of the LGBT community increases. And on top of LGBT support, these large corporations and the states have overtly been putting women in leadership and or male dominant roles for no reason other than the fact that they are women. And I can make this claim because in nearly every case you end up hearing about, it is never the skills or the experience of women that is touted when they are handed these positions. It's always just the fact that they're women and that we're proud we finally got someone in this role that's a woman.
And with the Chief of Staff news today, that position is one of the more powerful ones in Washington that has never been held by someone who is not white and male. Would the president commit to choosing a chief of staff who is not white and male if Jeff Zients were to leave before the end of the president's term?
Here's what I'll say to this. I'm certainly not going to get ahead of the president. That is not something that I can do from here. But look, and I kind of said it at the top, the Biden-Harris administration is the most diverse in history. That is a fact. And we expect this trend to continue. The cabinet is majority people of color for the first time in history. The cabinet is majority female for the first time in history. The majority of White House senior staff identify as female. 40% of White House senior staff identify as part of racially diverse communities. A record 6 assistants to the president are openly LGBTQ. And also if you think about our 30,000, about 3,000 appointees, 58% female, 51% people of color, 6% disabled, 31% first-generation Americans, 17% first-generation college grads, and 14%, when I say 17% first-generation college grads, I forgot to add that percent, and 14% LGBTQ. And I think that matters. This is a record that the president is truly proud of, and I think not just the president, all of us here who are members of his team.
And I say nearly here because in the cases that are not shared for all to see, women in leadership or typically male jobs have actually earned their jobs and are incredibly intelligent and talented. And whether more men are now identifying as women because they feel comfortable admitting it, or if they now feel free to explore their feelings, doesn't matter. The numbers in public discourse remain the same regardless of reason, and we are increasingly less concerned about what being a man is all about. Whether that be because men find that society is more interested in the other sex, or if the expectations of real men have been forgotten, while as a society we are captivated by other manufactured problems we have brought upon ourselves. Now, before carrying on any further, allow me once again to reiterate and oversimplify my stance on this powder keg topic. Natural rights cannot be messed with. Nobody has the authority to do so, no matter who they are, no matter how big of a group they claim to be a part of, and no matter what document or doctrine they say lends them the authority to do so. Therefore, I am not saying being trans or gay should be illegal, or that these identities should not be eligible for equal treatment. Just like how it is the right of those who identify as being trans or gay to be with whoever they want, it is the right of those who do not identify with that group to hold the beliefs and the traditions that they do, so long as either side does not infringe upon the other. And once again, I would be remiss if I did not reiterate that the tension between these two demographics exists solely because of the state's involvement, and if they stayed out of our bedrooms, schools, and our churches, leaving people to freely go about their lives, the world would be a more peaceful, accepting, and happy place. Rant over. And with that little disclaimer and the wind-up of this topic out of the way, it is not difficult to imagine people having just as hard of a time answering the question, what is a man, considering how the fabric of reality is stretched to its limits when the alternative question is asked. One is forced to perform mental gymnastics navigating the minefield of manufactured concepts such as toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, mansplaining, and other negative generalizations that have been forced on males. Most of the time, people will just retreat to their minds and refuse to openly share their thoughts to avoid persecution, and in some cases will even lie about their beliefs when asked for the same reason. We saw a lot of this when people were getting canceled over the last 3 years, where associates would support individuals who were in the hot seat in private, but pile onto the hate in the public square, which is another phenomenon mentioned in Galileo's middle finger, as well as the coddling of the American mind. And this just goes to show that this behavior isn't new and doesn't just apply to what one believes what a man or a woman is. It applies to any politically charged topic. So, as everything in this country becomes more politicized and people increasingly become more and more extreme in their defending of their ideologies, this will only get worse. But by all means, just keep voting harder, keep posting, keep, marching and shouting as loud as you want. But because this isn't explicit censorship, and I have already covered that topic recently, I will not be approaching from a freedom of speech and ideas angle as I make my case for what a man is or should be. Instead, I'm just going to light this powder keg by answering the question of what is a man with my own subjective beliefs, and hope that at the very least they spark thought for anyone listening. Yes, a man must be a biological male. That is simply the scientific and factual barrier to entry. That is not up for debate or interpretation. But more importantly, a man is strong mentally and physically, and constantly seeks to sharpen his body and mind. A man is responsible for his actions and all of the outcomes in his life and is aware of this at all times. And a man is ready and willing to do that which is demanding but necessary and best for himself, his family, and his community. Now, the casual observer might note that aside from the first qualifier, these traits can very easily be demonstrated by biological females, and they'd be right. But like being a responsible gun owner or a father, two examples I have used in prior episodes, you do not qualify for the title if you do not meet all the criteria, and that is important. In both of these cases, these titles are not ones to be taken lightly, as tremendous responsibility goes hand in hand with them. And that isn't a philosophical proclamation. Society has viewed people with these titles in the context of what is expected of them, and has relied on them to carry out the monumental tasks of protecting and keeping their loved ones alive, and raising and providing for their families. Simply buying a gun does not make you a responsible gun owner, just like how knocking up your girlfriend doesn't make you a father. Or, in this case, just like how being born or saying you're a man does not make you a man. In these examples, you are a liability because you flaunt these titles as you have done the bare minimum, but you lack the skills required. You do not qualify. All things worthy of praise require work to obtain, like becoming a professional athlete, a famous musician, or a successful CEO. Many hours, days, and years are spent practicing, training, and grinding to make sure everything in one's life is aligned to ensure success in earning these titles. And that has to be remembered at all times. There are no shortcuts. You are not a man or a woman simply by being born or saying you are, like I just said. Just like how I am not a podcaster just because I invested my time and money into this. I simply have a podcast. I have not earned enough followers and listeners because I have not put in enough work. I have a lot to learn and many, many more hours on both sides of the microphone, recording, editing, marketing, etc., before I am any good at this and worthy of that title. And that title isn't anywhere near as valuable to society as a man or a father. And again, covering my ass here, I am not saying women should not exhibit the qualities of a man, because the qualities I listed earlier in my definition are objectively all good qualities. Nor am I trying to diminish the importance of women, but this segment is focused on answering the question of what a man is, since we seem to have lost the ability to answer the alternative today, and I fear what will happen on the other side of that coin. However, it is well documented throughout history that successful societies all had different roles played by men and women. That is not sexist, that is simply a fact and a product of nature and evolution. Just like how we need skilled workers in the trades, like I mentioned in 2 episodes ago now, we need men and women participating and contributing in a society according to the laws of nature/evolution to help it proliferate. And if you want to swim upstream and fight these roles that evolution has created for us, by all means, you know exactly what I'm going to say, as is your right. Just don't be surprised if it doesn't work out. Just keep in mind that all of the over-socialized causes you have made your identity cease to exist the second real adversity finds its way to your doorstep. The latest example? Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, all women and children were allowed to leave the country to seek refuge and asylum. But all men, 18 to 60 years of age, were ordered to stay and had no right to leave. And note, you didn't hear any cries for equal or even equitable representation in the Ukrainian armed forces, though this is likely the equitable outcome in that case. All of that critical gender theory went right out the window, just like how critical race theory, critical climate theory, and any other critical framework which resides at the center of the over-socialized individuals' lives will constantly become worthless in the face of real-world problems. I realize I have now used the term over-socialized and manufactured issues a lot, so perhaps it's time to finally go over where those terms came from in an episode in the next week or so, but that one's going to be very spicy, so it absolutely has to be its own thing. I can't include it in here. But to wrap this topic up, the point I want to get across from all of this is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with being a man, just like there is nothing wrong with being a woman. It is part of your purpose on this earth, and you contribute to society should you strive to meet the criteria of what a man is. Ignore the noise perpetuated by those who lack purpose and carry on living a free and virtuous life. For it is the greatest violation and disservice to society to not only suppress the importance of men, but to glorify the erosion of what they should be in order to live a life of freedom and virtue that brings about peace, happiness, and purpose. So that was my rambling about what I believe a man is. It is somewhat vague, I understand. Obviously, I had to include the biological qualifier. I think that is a flag in the ground that absolutely cannot move. And I think the passages from Miss Dreger's book are highly relevant in this case. So read the book, really reflect on what it is to be a man. Let me know if you agree with that definition. And if you don't, let's have a debate about it. I love a good debate. I love conversation. I love the feedback. Let's continue to light the powder keg and have a real conversation. I understand social media and even this methodology isn't the most effective way to communicate thoughts, but who knows? Maybe we get some face to faces with some interesting people. I say interesting because you don't have to be famous to be interesting. If you can hold a good conversation and you have unique beliefs, or even have enough facts to back those beliefs, I consider you to be an interesting person. Excuse me. So let me know your thoughts and let's see what just happens. But anyways, speaking about men, let's talk about fighting. So a couple years ago now, I believe it was a couple years ago now, I strolled into an MMA gym. My buddy of mine actually handed me an old pair of his boxing gloves. He had gotten new ones, and I had no experience with combat sports at the time. Never even tried it out for a day. Not even the basics, not even the fundamentals. I watch UFC, but that's about it. I would be absolutely hopeless, realistically, in a fight with anybody who had even a minor idea of what they were doing. So I got the gloves and I said, "What the hell? This will be it. This will be the push I need." Excuse me. Oh, let's just find a gym. Let's go. So I did some research on a gym close by. It turns out the gloves actually didn't fit my gigantic bare hands, so I had to buy different gloves. But I was so committed, didn't care. Walked in, and I chose to start with Muay Thai. That seemed to be pretty flashy, pretty cool. I still think it is, and I absolutely love it. Now, don't get me wrong. You are going to start, and it cannot be overemphasized enough that when you do start, you are going to feel like a fish out of water for several months, and even years, depending on how coordinated you are, how balanced and flexible you are, your partner, and whatnot. But it took me about 5-6 months to really feel like, okay, I understand the basics, and I don't feel like I'm completely out of my depth here. And so I come from a basketball background, where I'd want to have a very wide stance. I want to be very, very low, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do in Muay Thai. In fact, when people look at a Muay Thai stance compared to a boxing stance, Muay Thai is very straight up. Your stance is actually pretty narrow. Your feet typically sort of stick around shoulder width. Boxing is a little bit wider, and you do stay a little bit lower because in boxing, you don't have to worry about legs or knees coming to your head. Where in Muay Thai, the taller you are, the harder it is to get that leg or that knee up to your face. So breaking that little habit was very difficult for me. And on top of that, I might just be the least flexible person on the planet. So a lot of stretching in and outside of class before bed, during work, even I would stretch. I still stretch, trying to remain flexible and balanced so that I can be efficient in the sport. And conditioning. In fact, the strength and conditioning classes at this gym are by far the hardest workouts I have ever experienced. I come, and I would work out every day. I went to the gym every day before this, but it was traditional like push pull, bench, curls, lat pulls, stuff like that. The deadlifts, just like all, the traditional gym workout sort of things. You have a push day, a pull day, an arm day, a leg day. Nothing could have possibly prepared me for what I used to do for this class and what we do. We do a lot of kettlebells, a lot of calisthenics, Bulgarian bags. And if you haven't used one, so everyone hates them. I actually don't mind them. I think they're an incredible tool. They're so versatile. You can do so many things with them. Primarily, they're used for swinging sort of like around your head, and the way your form is supposed to be while you're doing that, it's an incredible core workout. But you can put them on your shoulders. You can squat with them. You can do sort of like overhead press. You can do skull crushers. It's an incredibly versatile tool. We do maces as well. The battle rope, and other things that I've never even touched before, but it's seen in gyms. And the ranges of motion and just the overall stamina that is required was something I had never been exposed to in my life. But I'm in the best shape of my life. I leave those classes feeling absolutely great, and it's my favorite class of the week whenever strength and conditioning comes up. So much so that Saturday morning at 8:30, no matter what it is on a Friday night, typically I go out with the fellas, enjoy a few drinks, and sometimes we're out, till 2 or even earlier in the morning or later in the morning rather. I don't care. I'm always finding my way back to morning strength and conditioning at 8:30, and half the time I'm hungover, but I think it's great. I come out leaving excellent. It's still a great workout, sweat out all the demons, and it's the best way to start the day, in my opinion. Now, I have also, and when I say just started, I mean 2 or 3 classes into learning jujitsu, specifically no-gi. I wanted to start with no-gi. I don't know why. It might have just been more attractive to me from watching, UFC. I do understand that it is more difficult because there's fewer things to grab onto, whereas with the gi, you can grab onto everything that your opponent has on. But it kind of spoke to me. It seemed to be a little more real world applicable, I think. But again, I'm an absolute beginner. I know absolutely nothing. I've only done 3 classes, and I feel like I am walking on a different planet. Gravity doesn't even seem to apply. The laws of physics don't even seem to apply regularly when you're rolling or drilling with somebody who's been doing it for years and years and years. I am a fairly large fellow, tall, heavier fellow, and I get thrown around by kids, and by kids I mean guys my age, but smaller guys than I, effortlessly. They're hardly breathing, they're hardly breaking a sweat, and I am trying to exert all of my force and all of my weight, and I can't even budge these guys. And it is absolutely crazy to know that if these guys ever were to cause a problem out in public or at a bar, and I had an ego and I tried to smash them in, and they got their hands on me, I would be in some serious shit. I'd be in some serious trouble. That's another interesting thing, the ego aspect. So I walked in my first day of Muay Thai. Maybe the only new guy, maybe there's only 2 other new people there on that given day. But before warm-up started, someone from the gym who'd been there for a while said, "Hey, what's your name?" "Oh, hey, here's my name." "You new here?" "Yep, you have any experience? Have you seen anything?" "Oh, no." He's like, "All right, cool. About the warm-up, I'll walk you through the warm-ups. I'll try to walk you through the form as best I can. And then when class starts, I'll show you where to go and, what you're going to be doing, basically." And I was never left just to sort of float around on my own. Someone greeted me. Someone was very friendly. Someone was very informative and willing to help and willing to spend their time. And even after I got past like that brand newcomer phase, I would still have to like drill. And there would be veterans who had actually taken on fights and who had actually been doing it for years and years and years, who, because of their size, would get paired with me, and they'd have to take it slow. They would have to have a newcomer, hold pads for them very poorly, and they would have to try to talk the newcomer through, how to kick right. The most basic thing. They would spend an hour trying to, correct me and, keep my form right, keep it tight. And I was extremely grateful for that. I thanked them profusely. I felt so bad that I was holding them back in a way, but that's what sort of being a part of a gym like that is all about, or at least a good gym from what I've heard. That's what it should be all about. And I never felt that they were angry or frustrated that they got stuck with me. And that sort of, letting go of the ego, I think is critical. And it should be, a necessity if you are thinking about taking that step and doing this, because you're gonna get hurt. It's holding pads, even though it's gonna burn. You got to condition your forearms. You got to condition your shins. You got to get used to the pain. You got to accept the pain, but also you can't go in there thinking that you know everything, and you have to be willing to accept some real straightforward, blunt feedback from guys who've been doing it forever and understand that it comes from a good place. Because if they didn't tell you, you just look like an idiot and then you're going to get knocked out, trying to bust a sick, Muay Thai move on somebody at the bar, and really you don't know jack shit. So go in there, extremely humble. Just listen. Don't go in there trying to wail as hard as you can on the pads or on somebody. Just focus on your timing, your balance, your distance, and your technique. And just be a patient observer. Ask questions, speak up by all means. If you don't feel like something's right, ask for the feedback. Ask where your feet should be, ask where your weight should be, ask where your eyes should be. But Don't get beaten down when someone tells you doing something wrong. Here's how you should do it. Or if you just feel like you're not getting it, because you're not going to get it. And there are going to be days, even months and months after you felt like you are comfortable, where you're going to have a bad day, or you're going to be going over something new and you're going to go, wow, I really don't know anything at all. But that's been very cool. I'm somebody who has always tried my best to be an objective thinker, have always tried to keep emotion out of everything and kind of look at things in a very mercenary way. So that sort of ego aspect wasn't an issue for me, thankfully. But of course, it's pretty easy to spot when you do see someone come in who doesn't really know a whole lot and just start wailing on people. And I think that's something that I like to just sort of, it's a good exercise, even beyond the actual physical aspect of it. I'm sure it's mentally challenging as well, trying to keep track of so many things with your own body as well as the person, across from you. But it's also that mental exercise of checking your ego at every second so that you can think and grow. And that has been, I think, the coolest part for me and the part that I'm going to appreciate the most, honestly. And on top of that, I think the last two things I really want to call out is that there is a more of a community aspect to it. Maybe if you go to like a traditional gym, you have a couple buddies that you go with, or a couple boys that you meet there that when you kind of chat up with a little bit. Maybe you get drinks or hang out with after. But this is a very tight community. It is a bit of a smaller gym, it's a tight space. I think we're looking to expand a little bit. But everyone knows everybody for the most part. Everyone's very comfortable joking to a very adult level extent with people. And people are very much plugged into reality. There's not a lot of, I don't know what the word really say here. Everyone basically gets it. And that's tough to explain other than the way I just put it, really. But everyone can take some shit. Everyone knows sort of what's going on in the world. Everyone knows what, the truth is. Everyone can work hard, which is refreshing to sort of be in. There's just no bullshit. There's just no agenda going on there. It's just people looking to get stronger and to better themselves. And that's a really cool feeling, just to be surrounded by like-minded individuals. And I think the coolest thing is that, so before I start, right after work, there's a kids like jujitsu class. And they go over very, very basic fundamentals. That means like little kids, maybe I think they can start as early as 4 or 5, maybe even. And it's an incredible thing to watch because one, I think it's important. It's important to build that foundation for self-defense. That's just the fact, Everyone should be able to defend themselves, whether it be from a bully in school or, someone bigger or older looking to take advantage of them. I think that at its core is a very critical thing to have, or for kids to have in their back pocket. But again, we don't get, as kids especially, we don't get outside enough. And kids don't get the opportunity to play or express themselves or to really get creative and understand how, like the rules of society work when, through the playground experiences. And that's a critical building block for sort of making those connections in the mind and really being a sociable person. And that might have been, I'm not going to even try to name the book where I read that from. But it's a fact that recess has kind of gone down the drain. And if there is recess, it's highly limited and highly monitored by the school to make sure that nobody gets hurt, they don't get sued. And so the opportunity for, physical play is limited. Now, these kids aren't running around in this class like guillotining each other and ankle picking and like breaking each other's arms. It's very much a playful setting. It's very much a friendly setting, but it gives kids that opportunity, one, yes, to learn a very valuable skill and challenge their minds, but two, like they get to understand that if you're going to like push someone, you're going to get pushed back. And this class does teach them how to push back or not get pushed. And I think that's very, very valuable. And it gives those kids that understanding at a very young age, I think, of like, oh, this is like I'm actually struggling now as I'm trying to wrestle somebody, off my back or off of me. This is like what actual, stress and what actual, pain would feel like. There's not this sort of, words hurt, thoughts or tweets hurt mentality that sometimes you get in schools or outside of schools, even on social media or other sort of things that kids interact with the world through. And I think that's very, very cool. no one's gotten hurt from the years that I've gone and I've seen, but it's awesome to see, a generation, well, not a generation, but it's cool to see, a group of kids like that getting exposed to that. And you talk to the parents and they're all there for the same reason. They think that basically what I just mentioned is extremely critical for their kid. And you get all sorts of kids there, all sorts of, races and backgrounds. And that I think is the coolest thing to see too, is that there's no hierarchy in there. You go in there, you push each other, and you learn though too, and you have respect for one another as well. And so I think that's one of the coolest things to see. It's just extremely uplifting and sort of gives me hope. And it's a very small group, I know. I just hope it's happening in other gyms and that it's available to more kids, honestly, because I think that's just so cool. But enough of saying how cool that is and my experience at that type of gym. If you're on the fence and you're thinking about it, you're not sure if that's something you want to do, by all means, make the jump and just do it. It is well worth it. It's so much fun. You'll learn so much about yourself and about other things in the world. I can't recommend it highly enough, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer them. I am by no means a expert in this, so bear with me. But again, whatever I can do to help you push you over that cliff, because it is all of that. But that is all that I had. I am actually recording this on National Bourbon Day, so hopefully, if you did not participate on this Wednesday the 14th, you are participating now. This episode should be going up on Father's Day. If it goes up a little bit later, that's because Dad took priority, as they all should on Sunday. But this evening, I am enjoying some of the Weller Special Reserve from the wonderful Buffalo Trace factory. I do have to drop the mask here because I am actually drinking this. All right. Yeah, no, I do. Oh, Jesus, I punched the mic there. That was only my second sip, I swear. I haven't actually had a bourbon in a while. Haven't been drinking much. I don't drink much anyways, really. Even on the weekends. I don't drink it all during the week. I will for you guys, though. But in the past weekend, I didn't really have much of an opportunity to really get outside, hang out by the pool. Not by the pool, some Mexican beer and some lime, maybe even some tequila soda. But haven't really had the time to sit down with a good bourbon. So glad I can kind of enjoy this little glass before bed here, or before hitting the road rather, and then bed. But that's gonna be it. I did have one Q&A though. I cannot forget. I did listen to Tucker Carlson Twitter entry, and I thought it was pretty profound how he called out the media after just departing from a network. I definitely think the Wuhan flu exacerbated the problem. During the Wuhan flu, we had a warped reality of what was going on, and really the only major news source that was arguing anything that was being said was the one and only Joe Rogan, and it took us over 3.5 years to finally accept some of the things that he was saying. The propaganda being pushed down our throats is really just meant to try and divide us so that they can feel as well. They have some kind of power and that's where I fear we are being headed like a camel to water with the vaccine passports. And I'm glad that I never caved in and went through with that. My dad has a friend who grew up in wartime Russia and came over to the US and became a self-made man. And he said that anybody that stands with Ukraine is an absolute moron and is completely blind to the reality of the territory and the blood that's shared between both countries and within each of the countries that we have blindly sent so much money to over the Ukrainians and have no idea how it's being spent. Meanwhile, our taxes are still increasing. So I think there's some voice to text issues with that. But all valid points. Yeah, very well struck. Man or woman, male or female. What a poignant episode to not try to misgender somebody within. But yeah, the jab. That's something I haven't really touched on here, but huge shout out to those defiant ones who, despite all of the hatred they likely endured for not wanting to get it, who stuck to their guns and their morals and didn't. Those are the people who embody the spirit of 76. Those are the people who know what is right. And those are the people who truly understand the universal and universally accepted, Jesus Christ, I can't think of the actual thing now. Natural rights, Jesus Christ. That's what this whole thing's sorted on here. Those morally accepted natural rights that cannot be infringed upon. And also a way to channel my body, my rules. So shout out to you, good ma'am or good sir. I think that goes unrecognized, and that will go unrecognized. You will not be given the proper honor and the proper time in the spotlight. You will not be given the satisfaction of knowing that you were in the right, except for those who stand with you. And just like many of the gun owners here, that group is fragmented. That group does not like to stick their neck out because they know what happens when they stick their neck out. But I'll stick my neck out for you. Well struck, good fellow. Keep living strong. Or, ma'am, I just assume you're a fellow because I think the average Joe Rogan listener is probably a dude. And my average listeners, or my only listeners, are probably dudes. Well struck. Continue the great work, and keep participating. Anyone can participate. It doesn't have to be an answer to the Q&A that I pose. Send me your thoughts on anything if you want, and I'll include it in the Q&A section. I love me some Schizo BS, and in fact, I think the next episode, or the one in 2 or 3 weeks, is going to have a little healthy dose of that as well. But that's going to do it for this week. I hope you enjoy Bourbon Day. I hope Father's Day goes well for your family. Shout out to all the dads out there. Thank you for doing what you do, for being real men. Hopefully, real men and fathers, and not just scumbags, and somebody who passed the bare scientific and factual barrier to entry to being a man. But again, all of our socials in the description. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, our website. And thank you again for tuning in this week. And remember, never forget who you are. Never be ashamed of who you are, no matter what the over-socialized individuals who lack purpose say or try to convince you. Continue living a virtuous, purposeful, and free life. As always, stay metal. Thank you.
Oh,